Bridget,
excellent.
great to see you. How are you? Bridget, I wouldn't put a commercial break between us and Bridget McKenzie ever. So, Bridget, great to see you. Thanks for coming on this morning. I want to ask you about these hate bill laws. Understand the whole questions around national security and anti-Semitism, so keen to hear what you have to say on that. But the big question mark in my mind is, at what price? Are we paying a high price for free speech in order to guarantee these protections? Can you please explain, Bridget?
Yeah, great to be with you guys, as always, on a Sunday morning, and your Outsiders Army watching along at home. Well, once again, you know, Albo and his Labor team, the conflict internally for the Labor Party has been exposed on their inaction and their weakness on dealing with anti-Semitism that we've seen rising on our streets. And they've had to be shamed, essentially, into supporting amendments for us to their hate speech laws, which would protect places of worship. I think we want to make sure that we've got mandatory minimum sentencing of up to 6 years for terrorist act here on shore. All the Teals voted with the Greens against that measure, which I think is an important point to make. And it means essentially that there'll be no more Hezbollah flags being waved in our capital cities in those protest marches. Put your Hamas headbands away. They are absolutely going to be criminalised on the streets of Australia, as they should be. And it doesn't just send a good deterrent message to those who would seek to do harm and incite violence against fellow Australians, but it also, I think, sends a strong message to the Australian Jewish community that their fears that are being realised are being taken seriously and swiftly. And it was only Peter Dutton and the Coalition that really have got us, you know, these laws through. The Labor Party took too long, and we saw the childcare being attacked, etc.
I mean, Bridget, though, you know, all of these things that we're talking about here, the childcare centre, all of these things here, they were already against the law. And the weakness of the Albanese response to what has happened ever since October 7th was to, A, not see the law enforced. And we saw this weirdness with his not knowing even that there was that caravan in Durrell that had all the explosives in it, and, you know, his lack of leadership and his fecklessness in the days after those attacks. I'm wondering, though, why we need to do something like further limit speech broadly in this country, which is already very limited, lowering the bar for what is now a criminal offence, taking away provisions around even intent. It seems to me that these laws are, with all the best intention of the world of supporting the Jewish community, and God knows they deserve support right now, but that all of our free speech rights, what are left of them in Australia, are getting further torched through this legislation.
Well, James, I think what you've seen with this law is the changes to inciting violence and the use of force against other Australians. It's not if you're offended, these won't apply to you. If you emotionally feel you've been emotionally harmed, these laws won't be applying. This is
I'm not sure about that, Bridget, because we have Christian schools warning that these laws will be used, weaponised against religious teachings. We've got others warning about a chilling effect on free speech. We've already got laws in place against inciting violence, against all sorts of things that are there to protect the community. But at what cost are we going to give up our right to free speech and to be able to have robust discussions, robust points of view that are not going to be criminalised? I mean, it's one thing to have a disagreement, to even denounce a view, but to make it a criminal offence and to set the bar so low, I just don't see how that's a liberal value.
Well, Rita, I'm going to have to disagree with you and the coalition senators and members that voted for this bill also disagree, because our advice is that the criminal code has very specific and agreed definitions around the use of this word violence, and that is that it refers specifically to physical violence. Now, I don't think pulpits, I went to a Christian school, I don't think my Christian teachers ever would be inciting me to violence against others. We don't want to see, religious tenets of religious faiths being minimised in their ability to be able to be expressed. We want to be a religiously tolerant nation. We have a lot of different religions. But we don't want pulpits or places of worship being used as a way to incite violence against fellow Australians. That is
and
not
Bridget, would
what
we hope to see...
So that's the tension.
Yeah, no, you've argued that point well. You've argued that point well, but I'd just like to know, would, for example, the post-October 7th, the scenes we saw outside the Opera House, the scenes we saw with Hamas flags being waved, or preachers yelling out, "This is a day of elation," where people have been murdered and raped and butchered, does that fall under these new laws? And will we see those people prosecuted under these laws?
Yeah, so there are minimum mandatory sentencing amounts for actually displaying the symbols of registered terrorist organisations. So, as I said in my opening remarks, no more flying the Hezbollah flag in celebration on our suburban streets. No more wearing your Hamas headbands at the announcement of a ceasefire. And we've seen those scenes here in Melbourne, CBDs, weekend after weekend since October the 7th, and the same in Sydney. And by allowing registered terrorist organisations, symbols and paraphernalia to become a normalised way of expressing yourself on the streets here, you have terrorised Australian Jewish families from being able to move around freely in our own CBD.
Absolutely, I agree with all of that.
James. It's registered terrorist organisations, guys. It's not your local Christian church.
Sure, but we see what is going on in the UK, and we see how these sorts of laws have been used to the point now where if you tweet something that potentially causes somebody offence, you wind up with the cops at your door. People have gone to jail for things they've tweeted in the UK off of the back of very similar legislation. Now, one of the things this law does is introduce the word force or violence into, what you're talking about with a protected group. If somebody is having a migration debate and says, I think some people should be deported, potentially by force, that could even wind up falling afoul of this legislation. I just don't know why we can't just have more free speech in this country rather than narrowing what we can say every time there's a problem.
James, we're going to have to still love each other but disagree on how this is rolled out. I love our country. I believe in free speech. Let's be very clear here. It's not mosques that are being firebombed. It is synagogues. And we need to make sure that Australian Jewish community, Christians, Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims can all practice their religion without fear of being subjected to an alleged terrorist attack. That's the incision that we are seeking to minimise. I agree with you about the issues in the UK, and I think that is a telling warning, particularly to Western democracies, about how we proceed with caution on these laws. But the way these are recognise the definitions already in the criminal code. In Australia, it pertains specifically to physical force or violence. And so I would see the law being interpreted continually in that way going forward, just given this legislation.
Thanks, Bridget. Well, I think that's a great explanation, and I think you've narrowed it right down to the term violence and physical violence, physical force. That is where this debate is going to lie, hopefully, and let's hope that the proof of the pudding is that we don't see people arrested for criticising transgenderism or some activist judge using it to attack the local Christian church or whoever it might be. Great explanation, great debate and discussion. Thanks, Bridget, and thanks so much for coming on, and we'll chat to you again soon.